Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. Randy Ahmad here. Appreciate you tuning in. I've got a very special guest with me today, Melissa Goodloe, attorney based here in Tampa Bay. But before I give her her introduction, did you know that over close to 50% of first-time marriages end in divorce? That is a staggering statistic. Now, how do you go through the entire process? Divorces are lengthy, they can get ugly. So I brought in a professional to walk us through it. Melissa, welcome.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Melissa, talk to our audience here. Explain to them, well, first of all, introduce yourself. What is it that you do? Where are you based out of? How long you've been doing it and that sort of thing.
Sure. I am the owner and founder of Goodloe Law, which is based in Tampa Bay. And I specialize in family law and personal injury law. So I handle anything from divorce to custody to child support to car accidents and slip and falls. I primarily focus on family largely just because of my background. When I first started out my legal career 8 years ago, I started out as an attorney working for the state of Florida, the Department of Children and Families. And so I was dealing a lot with abuse and abandonment of children. And so basically just seeing families at, some of their worst times. And so when I made the decision 4 years ago to open Good Love Law, and that just only made sense to focus my practice on family law.
Is there a difference? Is it important for somebody to reach out if they're going through a divorce? Is it important for them to reach out to somebody that specializes in divorce versus a general attorney?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Divorce can impact several different rights that people have as spouses, especially if there are children that are involved in the case as well. And so then you're adding that additional element to rights that they have parents as well. And so if you are speaking with an attorney who is not familiar with those rights and the laws that impact those rights, then you are absolutely putting yourself at risk for getting bad advice and not basically being aware, fully aware of what you may or may not be entitled to, as well as what your children may or may not be entitled to as well, because certainly divorce impacts children as well. So, absolutely is it important to consult with an attorney that specializes in family law. I have actually consulted with people who have done that, actually gotten advice from people who were attorneys but didn't necessarily do anything to do with family law, and they've gotten bad advice and unfortunately have dealt with unfortunate consequences as a result. Really quickly, I'll share an example. I had a guy that came to me for a prenuptial agreement, going through a divorce currently, and basically essentially the main issue was a marital home. And because of that prenuptial agreement, in reviewing it, he had essentially waived any rights to entitlement that he would have other had to that particular home. And he had
Wow.
that agreement reviewed by someone who was a friend, who was an attorney that didn't do family law. And so 15 years later, now that he's getting a divorce, he unfortunately I had to advise him that he was going to be walking away with nothing, even though he had contributed and that home had increased, significantly increased in value as a result, a direct result of his efforts. And normally under the law, he would have been entitled to some of that appreciation, but because of that agreement, he had waived that right. And so unfortunately, there's nothing more that could be done at that point. So back to your original question, yes, absolutely. Consult with someone who specializes in that particular area of law.
Explain to us what divorce means in legal terms. We all know generally what divorce means, separation of two, but legally, what is the definition of divorce?
In a nutshell, the definition is simply a dissolution of the marriage. And so you get married, you're legally married. Once you are divorced, that marriage is dissolved. The bonds of marriage are dissolved, and you are reinstated to your status as a single person.
Why do couples get a divorce? What are the reasons that you're seeing?
With regards to what I'm seeing in terms of divorce, I see all kinds of different reasons. In the 4 years that I've been handling divorce cases, I've seen infidelity be reasons, personality differences. You know, people have been married and together for a very long time and they change as people and they are just no longer compatible with, you know, who they were in the beginning of the marriage, right? And so just not able to really work through those growing pains. Money, finances, you know, one spouse being conservative versus the other spouse being more of a spendthrift, you know, and not having any resources and setting aside and considering things like retirement and things of the future and, you know, or addiction. I've seen substance abuse issues cause problems with marriages, domestic violence. Definitely have had a few clients that have had to take out injunctions for protection against domestic violence and coinciding with that have a divorce case as well that's also pending. Child rearing issues are also some things I've seen, you know, just differences of how one parent wants to raise the child versus another, like significant differences like corporal punishment. Florida is a state that actually allows corporal punishment, so that can certainly, I've seen that cause issues and lead to divorce, among other things. But I think primarily for the most part, I think all in all, I've seen a lot of times the red flags were probably there in the beginning, right? And they proceeded thinking that the marriage was going to change things. And then, surprise, it didn't, right? And then eventually it results in divorce. I think that's probably the most common thing that I've seen is that regardless of whatever the issue was that ultimately led to the divorce, there were warning signs that as, you know, that people are talking to me from when they first met and when they first got married versus now that they just ignored those signs, I guess, thinking maybe, like I said, things would get better.
Now, does the reason that a couple had a divorce, does it have any effect on the final outcome of the divorce in terms of settlement? For example, if people are getting divorced because of infidelity, is the end result the same as if they had a divorce because of incompatibility?
So, I mean, in terms of the end result, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, it really just kind of depends. I mean, things like infidelity are relevant only in terms of considering alimony. And so not every case is appropriate for alimony. And so in terms of the end results being the same or different depending on the reason for the divorce, no, I don't think the reason for the divorce has any bearing on the end result. The end result is completely really dependent upon whether or not the parties were able to come to a settlement agreement or if their case was resolved as a result of a trial because they weren't able to agree and the court had to step in and make a decision. So no, I don't think the reason for the divorce has any bearing on the outcome.
Okay, very good. Are there divorce requirements in the state of Florida?
There are some minimal requirements, only really that you have to be a resident in the state of Florida for at least 6 months prior to filing for divorce. Florida is a no fault state when it comes to divorce, so you don't have to cite fault as a reason for the divorce. In Florida, the only thing that's required is that the marriage is irretrievably broken.
What do you mean by no fault? I know you gave a very brief meaning to it, but can you elaborate just a little bit more on that?
Yeah, just basically some states you have to allege fault in order to be able to file a petition for divorce, like infidelity or domestic violence or something along those lines. Here in Florida, that is not required. Again, the only thing that's required is that you simply state the marriage is irretrievably broken. The reason for the brokenness is irrelevant.
Doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Got it. In the state of Florida, do you need to be separated first?
No, I have clients all the time that are filing for divorce and still living with their spouse, especially if they have a house that they own together. A lot of times that can be an issue of contention and they'll still be in the same home. So no, you don't have to be separated. And besides, in Florida, there's no such thing as a legal separation anyway. So even if you and your spouse are residing in separate locations, it's still not considered a legal separation. You're still legally married until you're not.
In cases where you had one spouse living in the state of Florida and the other spouse living in another state, how are divorce proceedings handled in that manner?
As long as the petitioning spouse is a Florida resident and meets the residency requirements, they can still file for divorce. However, there may or may not be some jurisdictional issues with regards to the other spouse who is out of state, depending on how long they have been out of the state of Florida.
Got it. Are there alternatives to working with an attorney when filing for divorce?
Right, because they can still go through, pre-suit mediation before anybody files for divorce. They can still do all of that with an attorney representing them, right? Because if you're looking to get divorced, you still have to file a divorce petition. You still have to file the divorce. Like there's no way to get around that. You still got to go through the court system. So you still have to file your petition and make sure that that meets all the legal requirements and have all the necessary documentations to make sure the judge is going to sign off on your divorce and grant the divorce. So those are all reasons why you would want to make sure you have an attorney, to make sure that those I's are dotted and those T's are crossed. Even if you guys are able to do it amicably, I still don't recommend doing it on.
When people come and file for divorce, what are the main issues of contention? What are people essentially fighting for when they go through the divorce process?
Sure, everything. So it depends on if the divorce is with or without children, whether or not there is real property involved. But essentially, the outstanding issues in any divorce case are going to be equitable distribution, which essentially is how you equitably divide all of the property, right? All of your stuff, whether that's your retirement, your furniture, your house, all of that, any marital property. Then, of course, the issue of alimony can certainly be an issue of contention. There's also, if there are children, then you're also looking at child support and time sharing issues as well. So it just depends on how much stuff, whether or not there are children involved. A lot of times, the main thing people like to fight about is the house and the kids. Those are the two main things that people fight about.
Who gets to decide who gets what?
Well, initially, the parties are the ones who get to decide who gets what. In any divorce, the parties are always given the opportunity to come together to try to amicably resolve their outstanding issues on their own. Every contested divorce case gets referred to mediation. So that's an opportunity to sit down with a neutral third party who is there to try to get the parties to come to the table, to try to come to some sort of common ground to resolve all the outstanding issues in their case. So they certainly have the opportunity to do that. And if they're not able to do that, then ultimately the decision will lie with the judge. I always tell people it's best for you to try to come to an agreement between you and your spouse because you know you and your family better than anyone. But if not, then yes, the decision lies with the judge. And so in family law, these judges have a lot of discretion. And yeah, so the parties, and then if not, the judge.
If it does go to the judge route, is it the person who holds the most money ends up losing most of the stuff and goes to the other spouse?
No, I mean, it depends on what it is that the parties are fighting about and what is that issue in the case. And so if we're talking about stuff, then things like I said, 401ks, pensions, the marital home, household furnishings, all of those things that make up the marital estate, the courts are required to start with the premise that everything should be divided equally. But there can be arguments made for why it should be unequally distributed. And so again, it's within the court's discretion to make those decisions. And that's going to depend on what the issues are, the evidence that's presented to the court to make its decision. And as I said, from there, the court has discretion to rule within the law.
What about the kids? If when kids are involved, how do they determine timing? How much time? Who they live with? How is that determined?
So, I mean, the law changed recently, July 1st, 2023, where the law now says that there is a rebuttable presumption that equal time sharing is in the best interest of the children. Rebuttable being the key word, because you can present evidence to try to demonstrate to the court why equal time sharing is not in the best interest of the children. But essentially, there are more than 20 different factors that the court takes into consideration to determine time sharing and a parenting plan that is in the child's best interest. Those factors are whether or not there's been any substance abuse, any domestic violence, who's the customary or primary caregiver for the children. So, again, there's over 20 different factors that the court will take into consideration when it's trying to figure out a parenting plan in the best interest of children, which is, again, why it is better for the parties to come to agreements on their own rather than leaving it up for a judge who doesn't know them, doesn't know their family, doesn't know anything about them to make the decision.
When people go through a divorce, one of the main options is definitely to consult an attorney through the entire process. On the flip side of it, what if they wanna just dissolve the marriage? Are there other options available aside from working with an attorney?
I mean, you certainly are able to, I mean, anyone can represent themselves in court. Anyone can file for divorce on their own. You don't need to have an attorney. You should have an attorney because outside of a simplified divorce, simplified meaning there's no property, there's no kids, there's no stuff, and what little stuff you do have, you've already figured out how to deal with it. So there's not much more for the court to do but grant a divorce in a simplified. But anything outside of that, I don't recommend people trying to do on their own. Everything relating to a divorce is governed by statute. And unless you have been to law school, unless you know the statute, unless you know how courts interpret those statutes, unless you know the laws that impact certain rights that you may have as a result of the divorce, I don't recommend doing it on your own. If you're entitled to alimony, if you're entitled to a portion of your spouse's pension or 401k, there's certain things you might be waiving if you don't have an attorney to consult with and advise you. So I don't recommend doing it on your own. In terms of resolving a divorce without litigation, absolutely. You can certainly do things before filing for divorce. You can go to mediation voluntarily and try to come to an agreement with a mediator, but I still would recommend going through that process with an attorney, because ultimately at the end of the day, you're still going to have to file for divorce. Still have to have a judge sign off on it. And you need to make sure that all legal requirements are met. So I don't recommend proceeding without an attorney, like I said before, outside of a simplified divorce. But absolutely, there are certainly alternatives to litigation, and consulting with an attorney is the best way to figure out the best route for you to go.
Speaking of reaching out to an attorney, how are people able to reach out to you?
So I do offer a free initial case assessment to ascertain what the nature of the potential client's issue is and whether or not it's something that our firm handles and is able to handle for them. And we are able to, of course, provide a solution to the legal issue that they're having. So I do offer free initial case assessments that they are able to book through my website, or they're able to call my office to schedule. They can contact my office at 813-865-3082. Someone is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to answer the phone. We also have a website, which is goodloelawpllc.com, GOODLOELAWPLLC.com, or they can email info@goodloelawpllc.com.
Very good. I'll also have that in the description below. So this wraps up our topic on what you need to know before getting a divorce. If you've got any questions and you're looking for a free case assessment, feel free to reach out to Melissa. She's got the experience to help you take care of it. Melissa, thank you so much for your time. I much appreciated.
Thank you,
Very
Randy. I
valuable, very great
appreciate you.
information today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
When people meet and when they meet with an attorney and they're going through a divorce, do you typically know based on the information that you gather during the assessment, how long this particular case is going to last, and you can give them a rough ballpark on what to expect in terms of how much in fees they're going to need to have set aside.
I mean, it's a very common question. How much is it gonna cost me?
Yeah.
Because there's just no way to know how many hours it's gonna take to resolve your case from beginning to end, when a divorce case, especially a contested case, can last a year or more, right? There's just no way to know that. So what I typically will tell people, that the more contested the case, the more money it's going to cost you. I always tell people my goal is to try to resolve the case as quickly and amicably as possible. However, that is not always the same goal that the other side has. And so, unfortunately, I do have experience where you will get certain attorneys as opposing counsel who like to drag things out. And it's just more busy work when we could really just be working to resolve the case and try to settle the case without having to go to trial and do all
Yeah.
these things. I have a very contentious case, a couple of them right now, that's exactly what they're doing. My goal, like I said, is to try to resolve it as quickly and amicably as possible. But a divorce case, I don't sugarcoat, and I tell people a contested divorce is going to easily cost you anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000, if not more, depending on how contested the case can get, especially when there are kids involved. Because the house and the kids are the two main things that people fight over. People want to keep the house and they want to have the kids the majority of the time. Those are the two common themes that I see all the time. So there's really no way to know, but I'll be honest with people and tell them it'll cost you easily $10,000 to $20,000. I mean, that's just a given. But I try to be very honest with people and let them know that it's not cheap. It's just not. So I mean, I think the least expensive I've been able to do is to resolve a case in mediation. You're still looking at like five.
What is the length of time for something that's not as complex of a matter in terms of time? Are we talking 1 month or are we talking 6 months, 1 year
Well, when you
for
say
the solution?
non-complex, you're talking at that point, you're talking an uncontested divorce, because uncontested essentially means that these two people had a conversation before they filed for divorce, and they're essentially on the same page about how they want their divorce to look. They just really need an attorney to essentially draft everything up and make sure everything meets the legal requirements. I've done uncontested divorces. I haven't done very many of them, but they do exist. And in those situations, essentially, you are filing everything up front, the petition, the agreement, all of the paperwork, and essentially the only thing left is for the judge to really just sign off on it. So, but those are uncontested. And those cases can be wrapped up in a couple of months.
In that case, do both of them work with the same attorney? No, they have to work with separate attorneys. Okay.
Or they would just be, what usually ends up happening is that the other spouse is unrepresented. Sometimes they will hire their own attorney, but no, you can't represent both in the divorce.